very interesting. I was talking in a restaurant recently, very recently actually, to someone, and I said, "Oh, where's so-and-so?" And that person said, "We're not together anymore because my trust has been broken." And just as this person said it, I thought, that really brings this home so much in terms of our concerns. Well, what is the message that I think for today we need to hear? It's just this question: why are we here? And I want, in this talk, really as much as anything else, to ask questions, to give ourselves the opportunity to reflect a little bit about this whole idea. It's a big question, isn't it? Reminds me actually a little bit about a man who was dying. He was an elderly man. He'd been a preacher actually most of his life, and he was at death's door. He was on his bed at home, and he sent, surprisingly, for his banker and his lawyer, who were also members of his church. And so they came along. They were quite thrilled, I suppose, flattered. And they came in, and he asked them to sit on either side of his bed, and he held their hands, and he sighed deeply, and he looked up at the ceiling. And they stayed like this for a little while, actually, and the banker and the lawyer were flattered. They were touched that this old man had asked them to come and spend his last moments in their company. But they were also a little puzzled, because nothing that he'd ever said had given any indication to them that he even liked them. In fact, they remembered his sermons of how uncomfortable they felt and how they squirmed when he talked about greed and the love of money being the root of all evil. But anyway, they sat like this, or he was like this, for quite a while. And then eventually the banker thought, I really need to find out what's going on. He said, we're very pleased we're here, but we don't really know why you asked us. And the old man, who was now very weak, mustered up strength to speak rather weakly. He said, "Well," he said, "Jesus died between two thieves, so I thought I'd like to go that way as well." Now, I just need to qualify this. We have got bankers and lawyers here, and they're salt of the earth. They're good people. Are we okay, James? Jonathan? A special relationship. So, why are we here? Big question. And it ranges right across so many thoughts, doesn't it? I'd like to address it in three very simple points. One is to look at the big picture. Second is to look at us today, we who are here today, here and now. And the third is about going forward. So when we think about the big picture, and we ask the question, why are we here today? One question, of course, we could be asking is, why do we work? Why do you work? What is it that impels you to be part of a group of people that comes to wherever is your place of work on a daily basis? So I throw that out to you. What is it that motivates you? It's part of your big picture. You spend a huge amount of your life in a place of work. Time is the one thing that none of us has enough of. And as we have said many times before, the only time that we can be absolutely certain of is the time that we are in now. Not wanting to be morbid, but you cannot be certain of tomorrow. No one can guarantee that they will wake up the next day. Therefore, it brings to us the need to think seriously about what we do in the here and now, and what are the values, what are the things that propel us along in our lives. In a sense, it could take that very big picture to all of our hearts and minds. What is the meaning of life? But that's not what we're going to be talking about today, not in those very broad terms in trying to answer the question, why are we here? For those of us who work in this enterprise and in many organizations that are like ours, we don't have any difficulty talking about why we are here. We know what the basis of and the purpose for our being in an organization, a business, a socially responsible business like ours is. And there aren't enough words or images to cover the things that we do. I suppose we could say at our heart, we're most concerned about where people live, because homes, real estate is the fundamental part of our business. But a house, a building, an apartment, a neighborhood is only one part of the story. The entirety of the story is about how people live. And the way people live is not only around what goes on in their home, it's not only about whether we do their repairs, it's about what's going on in the world around. It's about the input we get from the media. It's about the way in which the culture of our society relentlessly moves on and continuously tells us we need to be a certain way, we need to think a certain thing, we need to buy or own a certain possession. And so the people we work with, our communities, the people we interact with, we ourselves on a daily basis, are influenced by so many different factors. And of course, at a much bigger level, we're impacted by the decisions that people who hold power in a democracy like ours make. And we're in a very difficult place here in Britain today, where we have a government, albeit with a slim majority, very focused on its own particular agenda, and where there is no opposition, where many people around the country are saying, what on earth is happening? And the 25,000 people or so who voted in the new Labour leader will not be able to swing the balance of power in 5 years' time when there is a general election. And so all of these influences affect the people we are, as well as our daily concerns, people's concerns about their health, about their family, about their future, about whether they will be able to fund their own needs and the needs of their children. Our experience of life here in our organization is like looking at a raging torrent. It's the torrent of life. It's the torrent of people's lives. It's a torrent that's in our own experience. Sometimes our lives may feel quite stormy, far from being like a mill pond. That's how life is, raging, tumultuous, full of turmoil. And when we layer it up with all these other factors I've talked about, not just you in your home, not just you in your job, but all of the other experiences, we begin to ask the question, why are we here? How does it work? How do we make some sense of it? How can we have any real direction? How can we find any sense of peace of mind? Or should we just be, like someone was saying earlier, just get as much as we can, be aggressive, protect ourselves, defend ourselves? Someone recently was writing a management text about sin in the workplace, and what they were saying was, the curious thing is that although we try and encourage people to be good, this was in Management Today, by the way, it wasn't in a religious text. Although we encourage people to be good, actually some of the most successful people are the most rotten people on the face of the earth. The aggressive, the liars, the people who step on other people. And curiously, really the writer was saying, maybe there's something to learn from that. Of course, my views are diametrically opposed to that. Because just because people get by doing bad things does not mean that everyone should follow that. Because somewhere within every one of us, we know there's a plumb line, that is straight out, and we know and recognize that's the standard we should aspire to. We may constantly fall down, we may fall short of the mark, we may miss the mark on a regular basis, because that's what's going on in our lives, because human nature is that. But it doesn't mean to say we shouldn't aspire. So this raging torrent of life is all around us, and as we look at what's going on in the United Kingdom today, I suppose we might want to bury our heads in the sand. We see a government that is bent on pursuing an ideology that appears to have no recognition whatever, not only of the price of a pint of milk, but of what happens in the real world. I've been in this kind of business now, this year, for 41 years. And I've seen the horrors that go on in people's lives. I've seen the disruption. I've seen all of the breaches of trust. Many. I've seen the misery of humanity, that raging torrent. And what I have always believed is that we need government, obviously for the people, by the people, but government that recognizes the need to intervene appropriately, that encourages people to be aspirational, but also seeks to meet the needs of the poor and the dispossessed, those who, for whatever reason, cannot meet their own. But sadly, we're moving, it seems, into a phase of national life where our government, of all people, a conservative government, is moving in a direction which is diametrically away from actually meeting the needs of the nation. And I'm not speaking against austerity. I think we need some of that. But here, for example, in social landlords that are focused on meeting the needs of people in their own local communities, we find a government that has said, no, we don't need that anymore. We don't need low-cost housing for rent. Everyone wants to buy. Well, the experience of Western Europe does not tell us that. And the experience of people in this country who own their home does not actually tell us that every neighborhood where everyone owns their home is the happiest of all. The reality is we need diversity in so many aspects of our life. What we don't have at the moment is diversity in government. We don't have diversity of thinking, and therefore we are in for quite a serious and a tough time over the coming years. But the last I looked, I understood Britain was a free country. That's under threat itself, of course. The proposal for extremist disruption orders, watch this very carefully, while they're intended to try and remove a jihadist threat, actually are the greatest threat that any one of us has for our civil liberties. And I would strongly encourage you to write to your local MPs, write to the press, and to become engaged, to ask the Home Secretary to define what actually would not be acceptable under extremist disruption orders. Very, very serious threats. I'm looking at your face and I can see very few of you know what I'm talking about because our media is not publicizing the real threats that are facing our civil liberties. So why are we here? Are we just going to be carried along, not just on the torrent of human turmoil, but the propaganda of ideologically driven individuals who, as a result of their disconnectivity and their disconnection from reality, are taking this nation down a very serious path and towards a sheer precipice? Edmund Burke said this: all that it takes for evil to triumph is for good men or good people to do nothing. And sadly, the biggest challenge we have in Britain is the apathy that faces us. What is so different about this organization? Why people smile and care and are compassionate and are motivated by more than just selfish desire and ambition is because we have taken the time to say we must stand against the rot. In other words, we stand against the negativity, the cynicism, the skepticism that seems to riddle British life. You know, some parts of it, I've said before, are good. You know, we're tolerant, but our understatedness takes us to criticize anyone who's doing something new or innovative. That's why people who want to innovate leave this country. They go to somewhere where their innovations and their interest in breaking open will be recognized, a place like the United States of America, which has its own problems, of course, around issues like civil liberties. So why are we here? Are we prepared to stand for the things that need to be changed? And that's where our idea of the road to renewal comes from. This idea of the 2020 vision. It's saying, okay, let's set ourselves clear goals and targets, saying we want to make a difference. Many of you have children, some of you have grandchildren. What kind of world are we creating? A few years ago, we were extremely concerned that it was going to be about environmental and global warming. By the way, all the predictions that were made in 1972 about civilization as we know it really beginning to reach a tipping point in 2050 They have been remodeled by some research in Anglia-Ruskin University, and they're telling us, this is a positive point, by the way, it gives you optimism, that we've got a bit more time than 2050. Lots of changes have taken place in commerce, industry, and in controlling environmental emissions. So don't worry about the world coming to an end because of ecological disaster. Long before there is ecological disaster, there are much graver problems of societal breakdown and dysfunction because of bad decisions made by individuals in government and in positions of leadership. And so the road to renewal is all about that. It's about helping us to transform the way we do things. So that's the big picture. What's the position with us today, here in this business, and in many of the organizations that are represented here? Well, because the world is changing so rapidly, this sector particularly is being driven inexorably towards changes that would never have been contemplated even 12 months ago. We are quite rightly looking at new processes and products and systems and initiatives. All of these are important, and they were mentioned earlier. Absolutely vitally important. We need to get every aspect of our business perfectly right. We need to move towards zero defects in everything we do. We need to be as precise and exact and exacting as we possibly can be in order to deliver high-quality business for the future. But we come up against a big problem, and the problem is in us, because change is needed quickly, and that's increasingly the state of business in the West today. The idea of urgency is very, very important. But habits change only very slowly. And human nature never changes. So we are facing, having looked at the big picture, the challenges and the torrent and the turmoil of human life, the fact that we want somehow to chart a clear course that takes us forward, that gives us something purposeful to live for, that gives us some assurance of success, that we're not just going to go down with everyone else, the last stand at the Alamo. On the one hand, we're creating business and performance opportunities and systems and initiatives and processes, but we are the people who can stand in the way of real progress. Because our nature is one that resists change, that stops us from actually seizing the opportunity to change. And our habits are the killer for almost all of us. Someone has said that it takes 21 days to change a habit or to learn a new one. And in business, as well as in our private lives, we need to identify those habits that are not helpful and be prepared to change. Human nature is also such that when we were at school, if we were told to do something differently, in others, we were corrected, we'd probably accept it because teacher knew what we needed to do. But when we leave school and we get a bit older, we get to the point where suddenly we take the view we can never be corrected. How crazy is that? The best way to grow and to learn is by being willing to learn, by being willing to be corrected. And so in a business like ours, which is high-performing, fast-moving, forward-looking and progressive, we need every member of the team to say, okay, tell me how I can change. Tell me how I can be different. Rather than sticking our heels tightly in the mud and saying, no, I'm never going to move from where I am. The same is true of people in politics, in government, in businesses, in faith communities. The need for change is ever present. So where do we go from with the big picture, the fact that we are changing, our businesses change, and businesses are changing, and we are the ones who stand in the way? How do we go forward? Well, business improvement, if it's going to be effective, and we're bringing this about in our own business here, has to capture our imagination. It has to win our hearts and minds, and it has to ignite a passion and an urgency for change. So in relation to any changes that we're seeking to introduce in our business, or you in yours, it is not sufficient simply for the people at the top or the catalysts for change or the champions to be saying, okay, we're going to change in this way. We need everybody to get on board with a sense of urgency, saying the times are dire, life is serious, Life will not be the way it was in the past, and therefore there needs to be a sense of urgency. Those people, those organizations, those businesses that have in themselves this quality of urgency are the ones that will succeed. The ones who feel it is absolutely necessary to adapt and change are the ones who will grow. And by contrast, those who fail to absorb this idea of urgent change, which is part of our lives nowadays, will stagnate and will slide back. And so we need to ask ourselves the question, where are we in that? Are we at that place? Are we in that place mentally, psychologically, emotionally, where we are prepared to change? Do you feel any sense of energy or passion when I talk about this? Or are you saying, I wish I was somewhere else? My question is, why are we here? Search your hearts, search your minds, analyze yourself. Because if you are not part of this forward-looking approach, A, you will have a big problem, because we'll find you out soon enough, and B, you will be extremely unhappy, because this is a business that is going forward and plans to succeed in the face of all adversity and all opposition, and there's plenty of that around. But in order to do that, we need you. We do not want reluctant conscripts, okay? Compliance is not conviction. So you hear about things like the Road to Renewal and the 2020 vision and all the maxims that we use about our business. I am not looking for people who are going to simply say, yeah, I'll come and I'll do my 9 to 5. We want people who are convicted, who are convinced of the reality of these things. If you are not convinced of the need for this concept called the Road to Renewal, argue it out with people in the business who are. But don't remain silent. Don't remain in a place where you quietly become a sleeping cell, a terrorist within the enterprise. We need willing volunteers who will make progress along the road to Renewal. That's the us part. The big picture, we can't change. Where we are today, we are integrally part of. And the bit that is all about going forward is what you and I can do. So I come to a close. Why are we here? Ultimately, it boils down to what you think is your purpose. One of the reasons why we encourage people when they get out of bed, roll out of bed, jump out of bed, fall out of bed, whatever it is that happens when that alarm goes, or your sleep app, or whatever it is in the morning, one of the reasons why we encourage you to say something good is going to happen to me today is because, for the most part, a lot of what's going on in the world is miserable. So rather than you breathing in the carbon dioxide of that negative atmosphere, maybe you can begin just to experience something that's positive right at the beginning of the day. And that is ultimately part of your purpose. If your purpose is to make something good happen in the world around you, that's a great purpose, because that in itself will be the transforming power that enables you to have a really positive influence on people around you. And of course, here's the real secret. The more you try to make other people happy, the more you try to disadvantage yourself to advantage other people. Did you hear what I said? Where you put yourself second in order to meet someone else's need. The greater, stronger your purpose becomes, and the happier you will be as well. So here's another comment as we do draw to this close from Edmund Burke. Having said that all that it takes for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing, he said this: when bad men combine, the good must associate. When bad men combine, as in government, as in those who control a nation, the good must associate together, else they will fall one by one, an unpitied sacrifice in a contemptible struggle. So 15, 20 years ago, people could have said to us, oh, your idea of building an organization where people are motivated, where you care for them, where you have this take it to the top, where anyone can see you if you're the chief executive, where you want people to be happy at work, they would have said 20 years ago, it's nonsense. Now, We've got, as I said, the National Institute for Clinical Excellence saying this is important. This is absolutely important for the economy of the country. We need people to be inspired and engaged. Find a single politician in any party at any point in time who has ever talked about the importance of people at work being happy and thriving and encouraged. And yet, politicians are the ones who are meant to control and stimulate and guide and drive and deliver an economy that is successful and which, depending on the vote today, will be around every government having to ensure that it balances its books. Our struggle could have been seen as being contemptible, and even some of the things I say today may be seen as being part of a contemptible struggle. How can you fight against this raging torrent that is being stirred up, this maelstrom, this vortex of human misery as a consequence of government decisions? How can you do it? You do it by the good associating and by being absolutely frank and saying, this is what we believe in, and what we believe in is good. It's an alternative to this negative stuff that's coming out. And that enables us then to look forward to the future. And I say this to you, your life has a purpose. Your story is important. Your dreams do count. Don't let anyone else tell you differently. Your voice matters. The things you want to say. You were born to make an impact. And the way we're seeking to do it is the way we are doing it here in this business. We're getting on this thing called the road to renewal. We've made some progress. But here and now today, it's a new bridge. It literally is a new bridge. Some of you are looking, I don't recognize that. Where's my old bridge? Bring my old bridge back. That's gone. I traveled 6,000 miles to get this bridge and bring it to you. And I have to tell you, it's been doctored a bit, of course. It didn't have the road to renewal on it. But don't tell them. But there's a bin there. As you approach the first step of the bridge, you leave the past behind. You say, I'm leaving the past, old habits, old ways, even old successes. I'm going on to new ones, new opportunities, new experiences, new heights, new depths. And I'm going to make progress along the road to renewal towards our 2020 vision. Can we do it?
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much.